privileged to now bring another political heavy hitter to you now, because I'm joined by Kemi Badenoch, who, of course, is Shadow Housing, Communities and Local Government Secretary and is standing down in the final two to be the leader of the party. Thank you for coming on. Good to have you. Yesterday, I noticed that every opportunity she could, Rachel Reeves seemed to have a go at the previous administration. All the woes of the world landed on the shoulders of the Conservative Party. The current leader wasn't best pleased when he had his response. How would you respond? Good morning, Kemi Badenoch.
Good morning, Nick. I think that the response which the Conservative Party gave with Rishi Sunak was exactly what needed to be said. During the election campaign, we pointed out that Labour's plans didn't add up. We repeatedly asked them for commitments, and now they have broken so many of their promises, as Rishi said, fiddling the fiscal rules. And we're going to need to expose them for that and make sure that they are held to account. I thought the most extraordinary part of the budget was when all of the Labour MPs cheered and waved their papers about a penny off the pint. And then they laughed when we all gasped at the employers' NI rise. They don't understand what it's like to employ people. They don't understand what that means. And that is one of the fundamental differences between Conservatives and Labour. They are union workers, mostly public sector, have never run a business. We understand what this budget means. They will just start finding out.
They came in promising invest, invest, invest. Is it fair to say, Kemi Badenoch, they came out saying spend, spend, spend?
I think they came out saying tax, tax, tax. And that is going to be a real issue. This is not a growth budget. And what is really interesting is what the OBR has said. In her speech, Rachel Reeves pretended that the OBR thought that she was the bee's knees. She wanted us to think that everything she had done was going to get a stamp of approval. Instead, the opposite has happened. The OBR has actually exposed immediately how they have chosen tax over growth. The OBR says 75% of those employer NI rises will turn into lower wages. So employment, salaries, disposable income, all of that is going to be lower than what it was under the Conservatives. That is a big problem.
Of course, they would argue, Mrs. Badenoch, that the big problem was 14 years of Conservative or Conservative-led misrule that's landed the country in the situation in which it finds itself.
This is nonsense. This is total nonsense. There was a reason why we were there for 14 years, and that is because the public trusted us and they kept giving us a majority, kept putting us in office. That's what she forgets. I'm not here to pretend that the last few years were great. They obviously were not. Otherwise, we would still be in government. But the bottom line is that Labour has no plan. They just want to blame Conservatives. Oh, those mean Tories did it all, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's no imagination, no creativity, no belief in this country, no belief in business to actually help deliver growth. And that will be a problem.
The measures, some of which we heard yesterday, Mrs. Badenoch, can you tell my listeners now that you, as a Conservative leader, Conservative Prime Minister, would overturn them, such as VAT on private schools or non-DOMs?
If I am lucky enough to lead our party and become Prime Minister, I would immediately scrap VAT on private schools. It is a tax on aspiration. I know hairdressers who have taken their children out of private school because that 20% is just too much. It is not fair. It is a cruel, cruel policy. On non-DOMs, I don't think a lot of people understand just how mobile capital is. I don't think what they have done is right. I have met a lot of people who aren't even non-DOMs who say that this has just made life more difficult for them and they can go elsewhere. They can go to Italy where they have a better tax regime. We have to make sure that our tax regime is fair, that we tax appropriately, but not tax so high that people just leave. That doesn't work.
There's a lot of anger down on the farm. Is the Conservative a party that supports rural voters? Jeremy Clarkson is saying it's best if you're a farmer not to die under Labour. Your response, Mrs. Badenoch?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily put it in those terms. I am a fan of Jeremy Clarkson and his show. But I do think that what has happened with the agricultural relief, with inheritance tax, is very, very bad. Most farms are worth way more than £1 million. It doesn't mean that they're wealthy. Farming is a very, very difficult business. It requires a lot of planning over many years, and most farmers and most farms are family businesses. If you make it hard to pass it on to the next generation, we're not going to have anybody growing food in our country.
Something I just locked horns with the Chancellor over was the announcement of an Office of Value for Money with an appropriate commissioner or chair, David Goldstone. And the Chancellor has confirmed that Mr Goldstone will have a salary. So that means that the Chancellor, the Treasury Secretary and her team, they can't offer value for money. They have to outsource that to someone else, which, given the salaries they all enjoy, I find extraordinary. Mrs. Badenoch.
We are constantly trying to solve problems with more quangos, more bureaucrats, more politicians. This is not how you deliver growth. We should be able to determine value for money within the civil service itself. If they cannot do that, then I have no confidence that an Office for Value for Money will know how to do that either. That expertise should already be in the Treasury. We do not need another quango.
Labour Party enjoy a huge majority at the moment. How much did the events of the budget yesterday strengthen your belief that with the right leadership and the right positioning, the Conservatives could actually look at returning to power in 5 years' time?
It really gave me confidence that we can now show the difference between Conservatives and Labour. When I was out during the election, a lot of people said, we don't know what you're about. We don't understand what conservatism in 2024 means. You're just the same as the Labour Party. I think now people will start understanding what that difference is. I believe that we need to have clear blue water between the two parties. Many people thought they were getting Tony Blair's Labour. What they're actually getting is Jeremy Corbyn's Labour with Keir Starmer fronting it.
You've said a lot about the bosses. Just a point on the workers, as it were. Do you support the above-expected rise in minimum wage?
Well, last year, I was the person who increased the minimum wage as business secretary. But I did say that that was just about as much as business could bear. If we do not have businesses starting up, or if businesses start closing because they can't afford all of the regulation and taxes that we're putting on them, then people aren't going to have jobs. And making sure that people have jobs, for me, is number one priority. It is very important that we have a society where everyone is able to earn a minimum wage, earn a living wage, but we have to recognize where that money comes from. And that money comes from the risk that business people take, that entrepreneurs start in terms of creating jobs and providing for the whole economy.
There's a key election next week, Mrs. Badenoch. Who would be better for Britain, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
I've always said that I like both of them equally. I think we need to wait and see. When I was Trade Secretary, I saw that we had got very far with the US free trade agreement under Donald Trump. That stopped when he left. President Biden didn't want to have a free trade agreement with us. I'm not sure whether Kamala Harris would, but I also don't know whether the new Donald Trump would either. So we have to wait and see.
If you are successful as Conservative leader and indeed at the polls, how difficult would it be to maintain a relationship with Donald Trump? He obviously has been a misogynist in the past, Mrs. Badenoch.
Well, I think that I'm able to work well with all sorts of people. As a politician, I know that people always try and characterize you very simply. He's clearly a complex character. But if previous prime ministers have been able to work with him, I think that if Nigel Farage can work with him or get on with him, I'm somebody who gets on with people. I'll be able to do the same.
Lastly, on the subject
and that goes for Kamala Harris as well.
Sorry, yes, indeed. Lastly, on the subject of getting on with people, is it a friendly fight with Robert Jenrick? There seemed to be a sense of bad blood, perhaps, on the weekend about your suggesting you'd never had to resign over impropriety. Are you two friendly?
We are friendly. Rob and I actually don't disagree on very much, but we have two very, very different approaches on how we would lead the party. And that's what we're asking people to vote on.
And are you ready to work with Nigel Farage?
I'm very happy to work with any party leader as long as they want to help us deliver a conservative agenda.
And would you welcome
him?
But
that does not mean letting him into our party.
No, I was going to say, would you welcome him into the warm embrace of the Conservative Party?
No, I'm afraid not.
Okay.
No, if someone says they want to destroy your party, you don't welcome them in and offer them a cup of tea. You have to compete properly.
Grateful for your time today. Thank you very much indeed. Shadow Housing, Communities and Local Government Secretary Kemi Badenoch appearing here on LBC.